Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of the Pulse with BP. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam. Folks, I'm so excited today to be joined by Mr. John Walters, the voice of the Iowa State Cyclones. Since 2003, he's also a longtime broadcaster in the state of Iowa. John, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Billy. Appreciate it.
Well, I want to start off with first, how have you been handling this pandemic? I mean, this is something that has impacted our lives both professionally and personally this last year. So how have you been handling this last year?
Well, it's certainly been a challenge. Number one, I got COVID in football season, which was a nightmare to get it. During the season, you certainly don't want to get it at all. And I was being very cautious to try to avoid getting it, but I did get it right before we played Baylor. And I wouldn't have known I had it, but we had daily test or weekly testing before our games because we're travel with the team or whatever. So every Friday I tested routinely. And this one Friday I went in there and they said, yeah, you have it. Go get a second test to make sure. And I did. And sure enough, I did. I never would have known I had it, never had a symptom, felt great the whole week that I was gone, 10 days, whatever it was, but missed a game, which I hated because it's the first football game I've ever missed. And then for basketball games, we broadcasted remotely from a radio station. And so that was definitely a challenge because you're really at the mercy of the people at the other end of the feed. If they decide they're going to feed you kind of what you're looking for, which is just a single camera shot with the score bug and the time and the shot clock all on there, great. But if they decide, hey, we're going to give them the video board replay like Iowa did. So when we played Iowa, that was actually one of the first broadcasts we did this way. They gave us the video board replay. And so every time Luka Garza scored, which was often, I might add, we were seeing the replay of his basket as our team was, going down the floor and attempting a shot. I didn't even know who shot it. It was awful. So, you try to clean some of that stuff up as you go, but I would much rather be in person for a game, and I can't wait to get back to doing that. And it was a challenge. I mean, it was doable, but it's certainly much more fun to actually be in the environment and feel the energy of a game and to be able to see all the things that are in your peripheral vision that you don't get to see normally.
Well, it's great to hear, of course, that your health was in tip-top shape, even during getting COVID. I wanted to go back to more happier times. When did you first know you wanted to get into sportscasting?
I was young, loved sports, absolutely loved it, played it every day after school, whether it was football, basketball, hockey, baseball, you name it. I loved sports, but I wasn't that good at it. And I was the youngest kid in a class of about 550 graduates, and I wasn't going to make some big impact on the football or basketball team, believe me. But we had a high school radio station, and I had always kind of had an interest in play-by-play announcers because growing up in Chicago, we had so many great announcers, whether it was Harry Carey, Jim Durham with the Chicago Bulls, Lloyd Pettit with the Blackhawks, and I loved listening to them. And so I was kind of fascinated by it to begin with, but when I found out we had a high school radio station, which was really 10 watts, 2 tin cans and a piece of string would have given you better reception than what you got. But it didn't matter. I was getting to do games. And so I started doing games my sophomore year in high school, and I've never stopped since. I've been doing games ever since. And so I knew this is what I wanted to study. Went to Drake University, studied radio and TV journalism with the intention the whole time of doing play-by-play. And as it turns out, my first full-time job was in TV. And I worked in TV for 29 years in the Des Moines market. But all that time, I kept my hand in play-by-play as well. And so I did Drake Women, then Drake Men, then Iowa State Men on TV, and Big 12 games on TV, and then into the Iowa State radio position. So it's something I've always known I wanted to do, really, and have just tried to perfect it over the years.
Well, that's great to hear. And I wanted to ask you, how did this opportunity open at Iowa State? Because if I'm not mistaken, I was reading that you replaced your friend, the late, great Pete Taylor.
Yeah, he was great, and he was a great friend. And we lost him way too early. We lost him at age 57, and I'm 58 now, and it really hits home with me to think that Pete was actually younger than I am right now when he passed away very suddenly, very unexpectedly, which was crushing. It was really, really crushing, and I still think about him all the time and miss him. But I was doing the TV games at the time, which was fun, and it was a great experience, but we didn't do all the games. We did maybe half the games, And then I got to do some TV games for the Big 12 Conference through what was then ESPN Plus, which was kind of like regional games, Baylor versus Oklahoma State or Kansas State versus Missouri. And then did some games for the Missouri Valley Conference for TV as well, and hosted their conference tournament and things like that. But I really always had thought I'd love to get back into radio, because radio is the purest form of play-by-play, and you're going to get to do every game. I mean, if you're the radio play-by-play voice of a team, then, you know, when Iowa State plays Kansas in Hilton Coliseum and the place is riled up to the rafters, you're going to get to call that game. Whereas with TV, it was like, okay, you're getting the third tier stuff, and ESPN's coming in to do that game. So when Pete passed away, I threw my hat in the ring for the play-by-play opportunity, and was hired, and very fortunate. And it's been an absolute blast. I'm just finishing my 18th year of doing radio play-by-play for Iowa State. And there's no place I'd rather be and nothing I'd rather be doing.
Well, what are some of your favorite memories covering games for the Cyclones? I mean, I think about 8 NCAA appearances since you've been there for men's basketball, including 2 Sweet 16 appearances in 2014 and 2016. What sticks out to you about your time at Iowa State?
Yeah, you know, those Sweet 16 runs were really cool. Unfortunately, really unfortunately, George Niang got hurt during one of them, who now plays for the Utah Jazz. And I think Iowa State could have made an even deeper run if George didn't get hurt. It was a great team. It might have been Iowa State's best team, even though the 99-2000 team that won 32-5 and went to the Elite Eight and lost to eventual national champ Michigan State. I was covering that team, but I wasn't the play-by-play voice. That was probably the best team that Iowa State's had. But this team wasn't far behind with George Niang and DeAndre Kane, Melvin Edge, and really a great team. And they beat North Carolina even after Niang went down. They beat North Carolina in the next game to advance to the Sweet 16, and then lost to Connecticut out at Madison Square Garden. But those were great memories. But I mean, there's so many specific games, you know. Anytime you beat Kansas, especially in Allen Fieldhouse, that's a really big deal. And Iowa State's done that more than any other Big 12 school, to win in Allen Fieldhouse. So I've gotten to call some of those wins. That's a special, special feeling, because you know how difficult it is. Same with football. If you can go win in Norman, Oklahoma, that's a great, great feeling. Iowa State's only done it a handful of times. But 2017, when Iowa State went over there and Allen Lazard caught the game-winning touchdown pass late in the game, and Iowa State knocked off, I think it was number 3, Oklahoma, that's certainly up toward the top of the list. So there's been a bunch, you know, some are for more personal reasons, like Dan McCarney's final game as the head coach. Iowa State beat a ranked Missouri team with Chase Daniel as the quarterback. Matt got carried off the field on his players' shoulders. They loved him. That was special to me personally, because Mac was such a great person and was really instrumental in me being named the play-by-play announcer at Iowa State. He really pushed for me. And so emotionally, I was attached to him, and that win was great. So for different reasons, different games rank up there, but it's a long list, and I'm thankful for that.
Well, I wanted to ask you about one game. You actually mentioned it. That was the North Carolina game in the March Madness tournament back in 2014. And I remember that game vividly, because I remember DeAndre Kane hits a game-winning layup, and then I think there was an issue with the clock operator, and then they're taking some time to figure out the whole clock situation. As the Iowa State announcer, how do you remember that situation, especially because it's such a high-pressure moment and you're kind of waiting and seeing to see what the final result is?
Yeah, what I remember about it is it sucked, because, you know, when you're calling a great moment, a game-winning shot, you want to have the call, and then that's it. You know, you don't want to have the call and then a 4-minute delay and guys watching TV to try to figure out whether there's time left on the clock, and then saying, no, it's over. And then you say what you would say knowing that Iowa State's won the game, but it's 4 minutes separated from the shot that actually won it. And so that's kind of a nightmare for an announcer. But no, it was DeAndre Kane was such a great player, and he was so aggressive, and he was going to take that ball to the basket no matter what. And he put it high up off the window and it went in. And yeah, it was a great celebration for sure, because you know, when Niang went down the game before, everybody thought, well, that's it. You know, the season's done probably. They're never going to beat North Carolina. But that team had a lot of other really good players, and they found a way to get it done. So I'll always remember that as a really special win for Iowa State and a special team.
For people like me who don't know, how do you describe the Iowa State-Iowa rivalry?
It's a great rivalry. It's not friendly, but it's not nearly as unfriendly as, say, West Virginia Pitt, or, there's some that are just nasty. And I wouldn't qualify this one as nasty. It's not to say that there aren't some fans that treat it that way, but I think there's a lot of respect between the two universities and the two programs. And we actually do a thing that's called the Iowa Corn Cyhawk Series, where we compete with Iowa in every sport that we both play. And then you get 2 points for a win, and or 3 for the football game. And then that determines the Iowa Corn Cyhawk Series champion. And so it's kind of cool, because what it's done is it's made it where just the football game, men's basketball game aren't the only big deals in this thing. Now, wrestling is always going to be big between Iowa State and Iowa. Women's basketball is always going to be big. But now all of a sudden people are paying attention to the softball game, the gymnastics meet, tennis competition between the two. And so it's really, really cool. And it's been fun. It's a really good rivalry, because we don't have pro teams in our state. These are the 2 top brands in our state. And so when they go head to head, it's a very big deal. And there's been some absolute classic games through the years, in football, basketball, wrestling, everything. And so some of the most memorable moments, certainly for any Cyclone fan or Hawkeye fan, are what's happened within that series.
I wanted to ask you about a few people you've had the chance to cover at Iowa State. And if you can tell me either a moment you remember about them on the field, or maybe a more personal moment off the field, that'd be great. One guy I want to talk about, you already mentioned him, Allen Lazard. He's playing for the Packers now, and he seems to be having a pretty successful career so far, playing with Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, it's so much fun to follow his career. And I think the thing about Allen is, when he was in high school, and he was a local guy from right here in Central Iowa, we played at Urbandale High School. And so I covered his team in high school because I was still working in local TV at the time. So I saw him play high school football, and great player. And was at one time was listed by Rivals as the #1 wide receiver prospect in high school football. But his dad played football at Iowa State, Kevin Lazard, and Allen wanted to be a Cyclone, and he had great offers, Notre Dame, and he had a bunch of really good places he could have gone. But he wanted to play at Iowa State because his dad played here, and he'd grown up a Cyclone fan, and that was really special. And so after he commits to Iowa State, all of a sudden his recruiting stock just kind of plummets. It's like, oh, you're going to Iowa State. Well, you're no longer the #1 receiver in the country. You're number 30 or whatever, which is crazy. But it just goes to show you, wherever a kid commits, it's going to, the stars line up with the Alabama guys, because, oh, they're going to Alabama, they're a 5-star, and obviously that's played out. But Allen Lazard had a great college career. He's the all-time leading receiver at Iowa State. But when he went to the NFL, he expected to get drafted. And everybody in the world thought he was going to get drafted, and he didn't. And so he had a gathering at Buffalo Wild Wings and sat there for 2 days, and waited for his name to be called. And I know it still drives him to this day, because he never heard his name called. And there were probably 50 receivers that went in that draft. It's unbelievable to me. But he wasn't the fastest. And so he had to use his length and strength, and he's a great blocker. But he got picked up by the Jacksonville Jaguars practice squad, and, didn't really get much of an opportunity with Jacksonville. And then out of the blue, Green Bay picked him up late in the season, and he got like 1 catch late that year, and then made the team the following year. And now he's having a great NFL career, but he just needed the opportunity. And so he's grateful that that opportunity has come with one of the great quarterbacks in the history of the game, and Aaron Rodgers. And Aaron Rodgers absolutely trusts him and loves him. But the reason that Allen Lazard's out there every down is because he's a great blocker. He does his job on every play. And it's really, it's been a progression to see him come that far. But I think the humility that came with not being drafted has really inspired him to have a really good NFL career.
How about Fred Hoiberg? He was, of course, the men's basketball coach at Iowa State for a long time, and he had a successful run in the NCAA tournament as well.
Yeah, and of course, he played at Iowa State. So I covered Fred even back when he was playing high school basketball at Ames High School. And he was a legend there, and then, committed to Iowa State with Johnny Orr, and then the coaching change happened, and he played under Tim Floyd as well. But when he came back to Iowa State to be the head coach, I just remember the enthusiasm that was met with in the Iowa State community, because Fred's one of the all-time legends here. His number is up in the banners. And when he said, "I want to come back and be your coach," even though he had no head coaching experience, no coaching experience really, although he had been an executive with the Timberwolves, certainly been around, very closely connected to the game. A lot of us had the feeling it could work because of his special connection with Iowa State, his respect within the NBA, where he was an executive for 10 years and a player for a long time. And so he came back, he recruited well, he got that team running up and down the floor, and they pulled off some great wins. And yeah, I think it was 6 out of 7 years Iowa State reached the NCAA tournament between the end of the Fred Hoiberg era and the start of the Steve Prohm era. And really great times. Some of the great teams in Iowa State history. And Fred had a great career as the Iowa State coach, obviously got the opportunity with the Bulls and now with Nebraska. But it was a special time when Fred was the Cyclone head coach.
I want to go back even before Fred Hoiberg. He's still coaching in the NCAA tournament right now, and that's Greg McDermott. Before he went to Creighton, he was the coach at Iowa State as well.
That's correct. And one of the great mysteries to me will always be, why was Greg McDermott not able to have the success at Iowa State that he's had everywhere else? Because he was very successful at Northern Iowa. It seemed like a slam dunk hire to bring him in here. Tremendous guy to work with. I loved working with him. He was great. But for some reason, it just did not work. And he had some good players, but never reached the NCAA tournament. And, so when he left Iowa State, the Creighton opportunity became open, and they had not yet moved into the Big East. They were still in the Missouri Valley Conference. And he had been in the Missouri Valley Conference at UNI. And he kind of maybe saw the writing on the wall a little bit about where things were going at Iowa State. He knew his son, Doug, who ended up a 3,000-point college scorer, was going to go to UNI. And he didn't necessarily want Doug to come to Iowa State. And I think part of the reason was he was afraid of what might happen to his position at Iowa State. And he didn't want Doug to have to experience that as a member of the team, And so Doug was going to go to UNI. Well, then he says, well, I'm going to Creighton. It's a fresh start. I'm taking Doug with me, and the rest is history. Doug's one of the top 10 scorers in the history of college basketball. And it really got the ball rolling for him at Creighton. And then he's been able to sustain it within the move into the Big East Conference. And so really happy for him because he's an awesome person. And I was amazed, though, that it just never worked at Iowa State because it works everywhere else for him.
You have the opportunity to travel to so many great places in the Big 12 for both football and basketball. What are some of your favorite places to go broadcast a game, whether it's to actually call the game or just have a chance to experience the city and the town?
Well, the two that I mentioned earlier stand right at the top because for football, there's no greater feeling than beating Oklahoma at Oklahoma. So I would put that at the top because it's just so hard to do. They're so good. And so I put that at the top because it's more special when you beat a great team. And the same thing for beating Kansas at Allen Fieldhouse. I would put those two right at the top. But I certainly enjoy our trips to Stillwater. I used to love going to Boulder, Colorado when they were in the Big 12 conference. That was probably my favorite city within the league. Austin's certainly a neat place to go. But really, I like them all. And I'm good friends with all the announcers throughout the Big 12 conference. And we have a pretty unique thing with the Big 12 announcers, I think. And it really started a few years ago with Brian Estridge at TCU, Wyatt Thompson at Kansas State. They decided, hey, let's have a dinner on the night before the Big 12 conference tournament. We're all there anyway, getting ready to cover our teams. Let's all get together. And so we do on the Tuesday night before the Big 12 tournament every year. We gather, we have a great dinner, share stories. It's an absolute blast. And so there's a real camaraderie between all the play-by-play and color announcers in the Big 12 conference that I'm not sure exists in other leagues. And it's really, truly one of the special things about being in our league. And that's one of the reasons I enjoy traveling. And I've really missed that this year, especially in basketball, to not get to go to those places and see those guys.
Well, that's great to hear. John, I was wondering, how do you prepare for a game? I mean, let's just say you've got a football game, Iowa State, Iowa on Saturday. How are you preparing the week leading up to that game? And how does that differ when you're talking about basketball?
Okay, for football in particular, I really start studying in the summer. I've got the free time. I watch a lot of games that I've DVR'd from the season before. So I've got a couple Iowa games DVR'd. I've got all Iowa State's games DVR'd. I'm going to go back and kind of study. I've got every Big 12 team. I've got their bowl game DVR'd or one of their most recent games. And I'm going to go back and look at those teams, and I'm going to do a sheet on that team just basically projecting my own two deep form. And I'm going to combine it with articles in The Athletic, which does a great state of the program preview for each program. And I'll pick up an Athlon's Big 12 edition and really try to get to know all that personnel, or at least refresh my memory on who are the key guys for all these schools. And I think that helps tremendously. I started doing that a few years ago, and it's really made a difference. But then on game week, it's, press conference, game notes, again, watching back games. So if Iowa played the week before against Northern Illinois, I'm recording that game. I'll watch it at least once, maybe twice, because you pick up so many things from just watching a broadcast. And so I really do watch a ton. And it's not like a coach watching film. I'm not trying to dissect what are they trying to do here, what are they trying to do there. I'm just trying to get familiar with their personnel. And I'll make my game chart just like everybody else does. I'm a little bit more old school. I write everything out. Pretty much everybody now has a computer program that they put all the players in. The reason I still write it's very old school, but I memorize stuff better when I write it. And so, as I'm writing them out, I'm kind of memorizing, okay, this guy's at this receiver spot, this guy's the number 2 at that receiver spot, this guy's over here. And so when the game unfolds, you don't have time to look down at a sheet and get a number. You just don't. You have to know who the skill guys are, at least for both teams. And so a lot of it is just going through those notes, trying to dissect, okay, what do I want to move from that 80 pages of notes that I got from Oklahoma State onto my Oklahoma State chart? I'm not going to move it all. And even the stuff that I do move to the chart, I'm not going to say it all. Probably 90% of that stuff's not getting used. But if the occasion calls for it, and I do have a mental note, oh yeah, this would make sense to bring this up here, I've got it in front of me. But I want it condensed into a single board where it's not just all over the place and I'm trying to rifle through pages of notes. You just don't have time within a game. And I think it's really important to have a flow to the broadcast where you're allowing that color announcer and you're allowing your sideline guy to have the opportunity to make points because they're the experts. And so I try to get out of the way as often as I can and let them have their moment. And so you can't just fill it up with stats. And, I do the board because it's good to have the knowledge here. But like I said, 90% of it doesn't ever come out in the broadcast. I'm not going to force feed info into the broadcast that I don't think adds to the broadcast just for the sake of having it. I'd rather have the game breathe a little bit, allow our color guy and our sideline guy to be involved. So that's how I kind of approach it.
John, I wanted to ask you specifically about college football. Do you think we have a parity problem in the game? I mean, you look at since the implementation of the college football playoff, it really feels like there's only been a certain schools that have been in the bubble. I mean, you've got Clemson, you've got Alabama, you've got Ohio State, Oklahoma. Maybe you sprinkle in another team or two given the year. But it seems like even good programs like a Virginia Tech, like a Iowa State, haven't been able to break through in the college football playoff. Do you think there's a parity problem? Is there anything we can do to legislate parity, or have you the mindset, look, Clemson and Alabama are going to continue to recruit the best players? It's up to schools like Iowa State to be able to eventually take them in recruiting and eventually knock them off.
Yeah, and it's kind of the chicken and the egg argument, because really the reason why the best players are constantly wanting to go to those schools are because those are the ones in the playoff, and so it just is a vicious cycle, and they just keep getting better and better and separating themselves more from the rest of the field. But I do feel like sooner or later, somebody's going to sneak in there and surprise some people. And it could be Iowa State. And I say that with a straight face, because if I had said that 7 or 8 years ago, you would have laughed at me. But Matt Campbell has done something really special at Iowa State to the point where they were very close to crashing the party last year. And I think they could get there at some point. But if not Iowa State, there are some other schools that are right on the cusp of getting in there. I guess I would like to see an 8-team playoff. Just for more opportunities to make sure that the 5 conference champions get that chance, to make sure that one of the group of 5 schools gets that opportunity to be the Cinderella and have that opportunity, because I think that's what makes the NCAA basketball tournament so special. And I don't think you'll ever get to the point where you have, Maryland, Baltimore County beating a Virginia in like you do in basketball. That's not going to happen in football to that degree, the upsets. And some fans would argue don't go to 8 because there's already blowouts in the semifinal games. Those quarterfinal games are going to be even uglier. But I don't know. There's something about sports where I've seen a lot of times where people have said this team has absolutely no chance of winning this game, and then they win. And so until you play it, you don't know. And, I would love to see, for instance, when Baylor and TCU were both trying to get into that, Final Four, if you will, and kind of got a raw deal, I thought. And they pushed Ohio State up ahead of them at the last minute. Said, well, they had one more data point because the Big 12 doesn't have a championship point game. Well, this year, the Big 12 champs had about 5 more data points than Ohio State had, and they still got in. So it's kind of been built toward Ohio State, I feel like, through the years. But I want to see each Power 5 conference at least have an opportunity. And the Pac-12 has been the one that's been left out the most. Okay. Does that mean the Pac-12 would have won a national championship? I don't know. But look what's happening in the NCAA tournament right now with the Pac-12 and men's basketball. I mean, nobody was paying any attention to these teams throughout the season, but they got their opportunity because the NCAA does open those doors. And look what they're doing with their opportunities. So that's what makes that special. And I think that some of that is missing from college football. I think you raise a really valid point. And I think getting the playoff to at least 6, if not 8, would produce more of that.
John, you've been so gracious with your time. I have 2 final questions for you. My first one is, what's your advice to aspiring sportscasters trying to make it during this pandemic? I mean, you know better than anyone, it's already a competitive business to break into. And now we have to deal with the realities of this coronavirus pandemic. So what's your advice to young guys and girls like me who want to make it in this field of sportscasting?
Well, I think I'll have to separate it from the pandemic because I'm hoping that we're going to be back to calling games the way we have very, very soon. So certainly the challenges of the pandemic were a step back, but I think we're getting past that. Hopefully, if everybody can get vaccinated, I think we can get there. So I would just say in general, for anybody trying to get in the business, the number one thing is repetitions. It's just like anything else you do. If you're a gymnast and you don't practice on the balance beam, you're not going to get good at the balance beam. But if you practice it over and over and over and over again, you're going to reach a comfort level where you feel like I can do this. And that's, sorry. That is absolutely a must for broadcasters. You have to get to a comfort level where it doesn't sound forced and where you sound natural. And you can get there, but the way to do it is by just a lot of repetitions. Listen, the lost art of listening. Listen to other broadcasters. Listen to the way their cadence, their vocabulary, maybe the way they use inflection to put more emphasis on a certain word within a sentence than others. All those things matter. And so you can learn a lot just by listening to great announcers. And I would say to anybody who's getting into it, get a lot of reps. I recommend a book called The Art of Sportscasting, which was written by a former Kansas professor, Tom Hedrick. It's kind of a how-to book on how to broadcast with testimonials from some great broadcasters. And they kind of just lay it out there. Here's how I do my chart. Here's how I remember to give the score frequently, which is so big. I think that's a great starting point. But get those reps. And then after you've gotten enough reps where you feel like you're pretty good at it, start sending off some of your work to some other play-by-play announcers. Let them listen to it, and they'll give you an honest critique. And I do that a lot for sportscasters that send me stuff and say, hey, will you listen to this? I always do. And I'll type out a critique for them, just some things that I suggest, or maybe copy and paste some notes that I've sent to other announcers, just to give them some feel. And a lot of that stuff's in that book. It's the same concepts. But I think you can't be afraid of the opportunities. And I was very shy. I happened to have a friend who wasn't, and was very willing to go ask anybody, hey, will you listen to our stuff? And, if he didn't do that, I probably wouldn't even be sitting here right now. But you are the product when you're in local sports or play-by-play. You're not selling vacuums. You're the product. You have to sell yourself. And so, I think that the best way to do that is to fine tune your craft as much as you possibly can by doing it over and over again, and then getting the help of others, because it's hard to do by yourself. But there's so many little nuances to it that you're going to get better at as you do it. And I always tell kids that are because I used to be in local TV sports as well, that first package, we'll call it, that first report that you do, you're going to watch it and say, hey, that wasn't that bad. And then you're going to watch the fifth one you're going to do, and you're going to say, man, that was 100 times better than the first one I did, 2 weeks ago. And then the 10th one, way better than the 5th one. So just keep doing it. That's the best advice I can give.
My final question for you, John, is as you reflect on your career, are you pretty content with how it's played out? I mean, you've been at Iowa State for nearly 2 decades. You were a long-time local TV broadcaster in the state of Iowa before that. As you reflect on your career, is there something that you wish you could have done or some event you would have liked to have called? Or all being said, you're pretty happy with how your career has played out?
I'm pleased. I have no place I'd rather be than Ames, Iowa, calling Iowa State games. It's been a dream come true. Now, when I was a kid, was I dreaming of being the voice of the Chicago Bulls? Sure, I was. I grew up in Chicago, and we didn't cover, or I guess not cover. We didn't really pay attention to the college sports as much as we did the pro sports. It was all Bulls, Blackhawks, Bears, Cubs, White Sox. But once I went to college, I really got into Drake basketball when I was a student there, and then started paying attention to what was happening up here at Iowa State with Johnny Orr, and then got right into the business. And the people here are special. It's a great place. And what we have in Iowa is we have college teams that don't compete with pro teams for the attention of the people of state. The people of state are diehards. They love sports, and they really love Iowa State athletics. And that's why we have 61,500 for football and a packed house in Hilton Coliseum for basketball. And that makes it special. So there's no place I'd rather be. I've worked with great people, very fortunate in that regard. And I'm happy.
John, this has been such a pleasure getting to talk to you about your career and all the different stories you've had the chance to experience. Thank you so much for your time today. I can't tell you how much I appreciate chatting with you.
Yeah, my pleasure, Billy. Thanks for having me.
That's John Walters, the longtime voice of the Iowa State Cyclones since 2003. Thanks to him for joining us on the latest edition of The Pulse with BP. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam. Thanks so much to everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next time.